Live from London, this is The World Today.
Hello, I'm Sally Burdett. Our top stories this hour. More deadly attacks on central and southern Gaza, as Israel says there's no indication it was responsible for a strike on a tent camp on Friday. Israel's military says it's killed a senior Hamas member in Lebanon, a day after the head of the UN warned that the country could become another Gaza. China says it's agreed to open negotiations with the EU over proposed tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles. The US heat dome refuses to move. Record temperatures continue to affect large areas from the Midwest to the East Coast and into Canada. Officials in Gaza say 42 Palestinians have been killed in the latest Israeli attacks, which targeted a refugee camp and a neighborhood in Gaza City. This comes after at least 25 people were killed and 50 wounded in an attack on a tent camp near the southern city of Rafah. People were sheltering in the Israeli-designated safe zone of Al-Mawasi when it was shelled on Friday. The International Committee of the Red Cross says its office was damaged. An Israeli army spokesperson says there's no indication it was responsible for the strike. Our correspondent Akram Al-Satari was near the attack at Al-Mawasi and has been describing what he saw.
As a matter of fact, Israeli tanks were approaching the area nearby the place that was hit by those tanks. Those tanks, it looks like they were aiming at a particular spot in that area. They shot artillery fire. The projectiles landed in that area. They penetrated around two, three tents, and they ended up hitting a wall and causing that large-scale injury among the people. An accident of mass casualty. People were coming, whole families were coming to the International Committee of the Red Cross Hospital that is run in that particular area. The area is predominantly safe area as described by the Israeli occupation forces. The large number of people who were killed were children, mothers, elderly people and young people as well. It was an ordinary Friday where people are resting and relaxing in their tents. However, that sudden accident like shattered their life, killed them. Most of the people I was there, I saw around 75 people to 80 people coming all together at the hospital. I saw 2 bird bodies. I saw people who were losing their limbs, amputations. I saw people whose abdomens are outside. I saw people whose arms are cut, whose legs are cut because of that bombardment. And I saw mothers mourning over their sons who were killed. I saw husbands mourning over their wives, wives mourning over their husbands. The landslide majority of the people who were killed were women and children, and the situation was extremely catastrophic. Large number of people who are killed, large number of people who are injured. The ability of the staff who was in that particular area, not far away from the incident, was not enough for the sake of just looking after all the cases. People were running, paramedics were running from one place to another, trying to help someone, and also getting busy informing other people that some of their relatives are technically dying and they cannot be treated. The triage that was done on that spot was extremely heart-wrenching. You have large number of people. You start prioritizing, looking at the cases that are like easy to deal with and some of the cases that are expected to live. You give up on some of the cases that are technically dead, either clinically dead or just struggling and dying at the very same time. I saw a father who was rushing and pushing all the staff to do something to his daughter, and I saw him being informed by the medical teams that there is nothing that can be done medically and that only palliative care, which means painkillers, can be offered to his daughter, and that she was technically dying. Some brother was also screaming and trying to get people help his other brother, but then eventually he was dead. 25 bodies were kept in the morgue of the hospital. 45 cases were just identified as people injured with different degrees of wounds and also with different degrees of burns because it was a tank shell that targeted them. And there seems to be a secondary explosion either by the fire that is in the place or any other sources. People were suffering, people were losing people were screaming, and overall an atmosphere of sadness and despair was engulfing the whole area back then.
Akram al-Sajri in Gaza. Israel's military says it's killed a senior Hamas member inside Lebanon. This comes after the head of the United Nations warned that rising tension between Israel and the armed group Hezbollah could lead to Lebanon becoming another Gaza. The IDF also says it struck 2 Hamas targets in Gaza City. Our correspondent Jonathan Regev is in Tel Aviv.
Regarding the attack in Lebanon, rather far from the border itself, some 30 miles or so north of the Israeli border, deep in Lebanon, Israel, the IDF saying it killed a senior member of Hamas in Lebanon. And of course, when we tend to make the difference, Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon, it is not exactly that. There are quite a lot of Hamas cells operating within Lebanon. Quite a lot of the rockets that are fired from Lebanon into Israel are actually fired by Hamas. And therefore, when it comes to the war that Israel is conducting against Hamas, Israel is saying it is conducted on both fronts, both in Gaza and in Lebanon. And many of the Hamas militants are actually killed north of the border in Lebanon, not only in Gaza. And this morning was yet another example.
Meanwhile, an Israeli man is reported to have been killed in West Bank, in other words, in other territories within Palestine. What can you tell us?
Yes, it happened in a city called Kalkilia. It's a city in the West Bank. It sits right on what is known here in Israel as the Green Line. The Green Line is what separates Israel from the West Bank. And in that city of Kalkilia, that Israeli man was killed this morning. Reports say he came in to Kalkilia for shopping, something that he has been doing quite a lot over the past year. Of course, prices in West Bank cities are considerably lower than in Israel. Not only that, on Saturday, the Jewish Sabbath, many businesses in Israel itself are closed. In the West Bank, of course, they're open. Many Israelis do that, actually go into the West Bank to conduct shopping. Israeli authorities are warning Israelis time and time again not to go into the West Bank, that it could be dangerous. This morning was the exact example. That man was shot and killed. His car was also set on fire. His body was recovered first by the Red Crescent, the Palestinian Red Crescent, and then turned over to Israeli authorities. And yes, this man crossed into the West Bank for shopping and paid with his life.
Jonathan Regev in Tel Aviv. Yossi Merkelberg is an associate fellow with the Middle East and North Africa program at Chatham House. He spoke to us about the likelihood of a full-scale Israeli operation in Lebanon.
We see the escalation along the northern border for a while. If at the beginning of the war, after the Hamas attack of October 7th, it seems that Hezbollah is playing mainly a supportive act in a way of very low intensity war with Israel, I think 8.5 months later, the situation is changing and the conflict with Hezbollah is taking a life of its own as the escalation, as 100,000 Israelis are basically been evacuated from the north. The level of attacks is higher. Hezbollah lost more than 300 of its militants. And we have also to remember that this is not the same government that Israel had 2 weeks ago. It's a much more right-wing one. After the more moderate left the government, and as a result of it, there are more pressure to shift the weight from Gaza more to Lebanon.
Do you think that Israel would be able to maintain offensives against Hezbollah in southern Lebanon and what it continues to do in Gaza? Is it militarily able to do that?
Well, some in the Israeli government argue that this is possible, but it's difficult, and in this sense, Israel will have to make some concessions on the Gaza front. We see that as a result of the way that Israel conducted the war in Gaza, in which it used excessively weapons that you won't expect to use in areas that are dense with civilian population. The United States rethought supplying of some of the ammunition, exactly the ammunition that it probably will need in Lebanon. So they will need to see and square this circle can they hold this, and at the same time not allowing enough humanitarian aid to go into Gaza, not to look for ending the conflict in Gaza, because as we see, there also been attempts of assassinating Hamas leaders in Gaza.
You know, we've seen mounting pressure within Israel domestically to agree a ceasefire. We've seen pressure from the United States, its closest ally, an order from the ICJ to stop the attacks in Rafah. Israel has not budged. Who will be able to influence Israel towards a path to peace, if anyone?
I think it's a combination. It's a combination of the United States as an external source of great influence in Israel. As I mentioned, they provide Israel with around 70% of their weapons, but at the same time also growing pressure from the inside. Domestically, we see, as you mentioned, protest and growing in numbers and intensity. I think the fact that former Chief of Staff Benny Gantz and also Eisenkot left the cabinet, I think they're mounting pressure. In the short run, it gives more power to the far right, but in the longer run, it means it's also more exposed to pressure.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, the German economy minister says proposed EU tariffs on Chinese EVs are not punitive, and both sides reportedly agree to talks. Welcome back. A reminder of our headlines. More deadly attacks on central and southern Gaza, as Israel says there's no indication it was responsible for a strike on a tent camp on Friday. And Israel's military says it's killed a senior Hamas member in Lebanon, a day after the head of the UN warned that the country could become another Gaza. China and the EU have agreed to open negotiations on proposed European tariffs on Chinese EVs. This comes after China's Commerce Minister Wang Wentao held talks with EU Trade Commissioner Valdis Dombrovskis. Germany's Economy Minister Robert Habeck is currently in Beijing, also discussing the tariffs. Yang Chongxi reports from Beijing.
The dialogue between China's Commerce Minister Wang Wentao and German Vice-Chancellor Robert Habeck started with the hot issue of recent EU tariffs on Chinese electric cars.
These actions seriously disrupt the international economic and trade order, hindering the global green and low-carbon transition. In fact, this is an attempt to suppress the development of Chinese industries, which we consider blatant protectionism and unfair competition.
In opposing the EU's decision to impose these tariffs, the two countries appear to be on the same page.
We know that Chancellor Scholz recently publicly opposed this investigation, calling it a huge mistake. You also believe that imposing punitive tariffs is the worst option and support resolving this case through dialogue and negotiation, which I highly appreciate.
I completely agree with what you just said. Both China and Europe, as well as China and Germany, have greatly benefited from mutual trade. We have always benefited from an open global market, but we are now entering a new phase where trade protectionism is rising in various forms, which is very concerning to us.
Vice Chancellor Habeck further acknowledged that increased tariffs will pose a series of threats and challenges to the global economy.
We are seeing increasing tariffs, local production requirements, and financing restrictions. These measures will raise product prices, reducing consumer purchasing power, and hinder investment and innovation. We urgently need investment and innovation in technology, especially in green, low-carbon development technologies. This is detrimental not only to the global economy, but also to achieving our other goals.
Minister Wang stated that China hopes to start negotiations with the EU as soon as possible if the bloc shows goodwill. However, he said if the EU insists on its course, China will take all necessary actions, including filing lawsuits through the WTO dispute settlement mechanism. Yang Chengxi, CGTN, Beijing.
At least one person has been killed after wildfire swept through parts of southern Greece. 55-year-old man was injured and later died in hospital. Authorities say around 45 wildfires broke out on Friday. Firefighters are still trying to bring the flames under control. Several villages in Greece have been evacuated as a precautionary measure. 3 people are missing after heavy rain and thunderstorms caused landslides and flooding in southeast Switzerland. The popular tourist destination of Zermatt was cut off when a river overflowed. A woman was rescued after being buried by a landslide. A search for the missing people continues. Officials in Saudi Arabia have been defending their management of the annual Hajj pilgrimage after reports that more than 1,100 people have died, mostly due to extreme heat. More than half of the deaths are said to be Egyptian nationals. One Saudi official, speaking to AFP, appeared to blame the victims themselves, saying they'd not properly judged the risks. A prolonged heat wave is continuing in much of the eastern United States and parts of Canada, with temperatures regularly hitting the high 30s. Scientists have warned that human-induced climate change is the principal cause. CGTN's Jim Spellman reports.
Yoga under the blazing sun in New York City's Times Square to mark the summer solstice and the official start of summer.
Yeah, it is very hot, and it's going to get hotter as the day goes on. I've been reminding people to just practice mindfully. You know, if you get too hot, slow down or stop.
A massive heat dome has settled in across a large swath of the U.S. and parts of Canada, bringing record-breaking temperatures from the Midwest to the East Coast. Just about everyone is trying to beat the heat.
Staying cool is a process this week. I think eating a lot of ice cream, taking lots of showers, and being grateful for air conditioning.
A new report finds that fossil fuel emissions hit record levels in 2023. And researchers say climate change, driven by carbon emissions, is making extreme heat more common.
Only 20 years ago, the climate when it comes to heat waves was quite different. And so people have not, our societies and also our bodies are not used to these events, even though they are now not rare anymore.
While heat blankets much of the eastern United States, wildfires are burning in the southwest, and tropical storm Alberto has brought heavy rain and flooding to Texas and parts of Mexico. Jim Spellman, CGTN, Washington.
Meanwhile, U.S. President Joe Biden has signed a bill to provide federal funds to parts of New Mexico, which have been devastated by wildfires. At least 2 people have been killed and 8,000 evacuated from their homes. Our correspondent Frank Contreras reports.
Up on the mountain near Ruidoso, New Mexico, the charred remains of properties destroyed by wildfires. Heavy rain overnight is causing flash floods in the affected area, making the already difficult job of firefighting even harder. 120 kilometers, about 75 miles to the east, the town of Roswell, population just under 50,000, is lending a helping hand to the evacuees of the South Fork and Salt fires.
Well, guys, we're in the Southwest, so we're all family. You know, I said the other day, we have everybody's back, and I meant that. These are our city employees here. And at night, when people get off work, they're going to volunteer, and they'll also be here.
I feel really safe. Gabriel Begay is a Ruidoso resident and a member of the Diné Nation, also known as the Navajo Nation. He's concerned about reports of flash floods and danger to animals living on the mountain where the wildfires are still burning.
Yeah, I think about it like the animals, like, you know, they're just running away from the fire, and they're like us. They don't have help, you know. They don't have water, or, you know, they can't eat fresh stuff. They're just running away. I'm just worried about the animals, you know, because think about it. The animals were here before humans were.
In this part of the American Southwest, it's a rural lifestyle, and people have all sorts of livestock and pets, including llamas from South America. Families tell us they're glad to have their animals here at the fairgrounds where they can be safe and well taken care of. Residents of the areas where the fires ignited on Monday were given short notice to flee for their lives. The emergency situation forced them to do the unthinkable, leave behind their beloved pets. Christina Waldrop is a volunteer from Albuquerque. She says one man who fled the fires was taken directly to the hospital. He was separated from his dog.
And so he wasn't even sure where his dog went. He ended up coming, he was transferred to the hospital here in Roswell. He came in yesterday morning into the fairgrounds just by chance looking for his dog, and we were able to reunite him with his dog.
Such heartwarming stories help relieve some of the sadness for the people who have lost everything as they continue waiting for weary firefighters and nature to bring the wildfires under control. Frank Contreras, CGTN, Roswell, New Mexico.
Senior officials from China and France have been meeting in Paris to discuss more cooperation in higher education. This comes as the two countries mark 60 years of diplomatic relations. Our correspondent Evangelos Sipsas reports.
In the heart of the French capital near the historic Pantheon, Chinese and French health educators have come together to exchange ideas. They want to find more ways to collaborate in the field of education with a focus on medicine.
Higher education in the country is its greatest asset and the most substantial support for its economic, social development and culture. It nurtures excellent talents who create knowledge and facilitate technological transfer, significantly contributing to the international community's development.
They discussed international cooperation. Friday's exhibition showcased the significant role of international education in enhancing understanding, trust, and deepening friendship between the two peoples. Agreements were also signed in the field of medicine between Shanghai Jiaotong University School of Medicine and the French institutions, focusing on the necessity of student exchange programs. 30 Chinese students are currently enrolled, with both sides pledging to increase that number.
Sino-French School of Medicine of Jiaotong Medical School, and in this school we will receive 60 students, no more 30 but 60, and half to be a clinician and half to be researcher. And we start at the present time, and I am sure it will grow very rapidly.
This forum and agreement comes as China and France celebrate 60 years of diplomatic relations. For more than a century, the two sides shared in education, specifically in hospitals and universities. Back in 1997, the Shanghai Jiaotong University of Medical School was incorporated in the bilateral framework cooperation. Today, the two sides want to take that relationship even further and include artificial intelligence.
I think we are really excited to see the future, because right now we are facing the, technology advance. So traditionally we are also, involved lots of the medical service and also the clinical research. In the future, maybe we will also, involve more the collaboration in the basic science and also AI for science. This is a kind of a new technology, both China and France we are facing too, and also we should embrace those kind of technology.
After 120 years of education cooperation and 60 years of diplomatic ties, the two countries hope to continue strengthening their global connections. Evangelos Ipsas for CGTN, Paris.
Irish whiskey is on the rise in China, competing with established Scottish and Japanese labels. It's being bought up by a growing Chinese middle class, keen to sample new tastes. Ken Brown reports from Dublin.
Ishkabaha. The Gaelic words for whiskey translate literally to water of life. And now the industry is getting a new lifeline thanks to soaring sales in China. Whiskey is reputed to have originated in Ireland around 1,000 years ago. The country was once the world's dominant supplier with at least 28 legal distilleries by the 1890s. But failing to move with the times, Scottish whiskey took over, wiping out all but 2 Irish rivals. The renaissance in Irish whiskey is now being helped by growing demand from China. Businessman Chad Huang has lived in Ireland for over 22 years, and his Chambers whiskey brand is a top seller.
Chinese people finally wake up for the brown liquor now. Especially the young people, we say probably around 30 years old, we see huge growth, especially on the east coast of China, and people really start drinking whiskey now. And then we truly believe Irish whiskey has a bright future in China.
Just a couple of years ago, worldwide whiskey imports to China were worth around $500 million. That's set to grow nearly 5-fold to well over $2 billion by 2025. John Teeling is a near mythical figure in Irish whiskey history, and despite having never tried a drop, he's known as the father of the Irish whiskey renaissance. Teeling broke the Irish distillers' monopoly in the 1980s, inspiring others to do the same, and now Ireland has over 30 distilleries, with many looking east.
The future of Irish whiskey is in Asia. China, with 450 million coming into the middle class, and it's the middle class that want to drink imported spirits. And the young people, they are the ones who want to drink fresh, new drinks.
For now, Scotch whiskey still dominates with brands like Johnnie Walker and Chivas Regal. But Irish whiskey, with its smooth and mellow flavour and wide variety of finishes, looks set to rapidly mature and become a favourite in Chinese glasses. Ken Brown, CGTN, Dublin.
And that's all today. Thank you so much for watching. We've got more news at the top of the hour. Up next, it's The Agenda with Juliet Mann. For now, from the team in London, goodbye.